Well, welcome to our first graduate student and postdoctoral fellow symposium. We're very excited about this event, and we're very excited to be kicking it off with our keynote speaker. It really is an opportunity for me to introduce today someone who really personifies the University of Miami's mission of transforming lives through education, research, innovation, and service. Ms. Mary Woolley has transformed the lives not only of thousands of individuals, but I would argue millions of individuals throughout our country. Ms. Woolley is currently President and CEO of Research America and has been so for the past 3 decades. Ms. Woolley has advocated for making research to improve our health and the health of our country a higher national priority. Under her leadership, Research America has earned the attention and respect of elected and appointed officials, researchers in the public, private, and academic sectors, media and community leaders with its record of innovation and advocacy for research. So I had the opportunity, as part of serving on the board of Research America, to attend a National Health Research Forum that she and her team put together last year. And I was so impressed to walk into that room and see in one room the director of the FDA, the director of the CORI, the director of CDC, the director of NIH, the director of NSF, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So it's very difficult, as you can imagine, to have any one of these individuals in the room. And to be able to, through her networks, to be able to bring in these individuals for a common and shared goal is really an incredible testament of her commitment and dedication. Ms. Woolley has a distinguished career that has been celebrated by many accolades, and I'll only mention a few because otherwise I will take up her time. She is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. Many of you know it's formerly the Institute of Medicine. She has served 2 terms on its governing board. She is a recipient of the Adam Yarmolinsky Medal for Distinguished Contributions to the Mission of the Academy over a significant period of time. Ms. Woolley has also served 2 terms on the National Academy of Sciences Board on Life Sciences and currently serves on its Board for Higher Education and Workforce. She is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and holds 2 honorary degrees from the Northeast Ohio Medical University and also from Wayne State University. Ms. Woolley has a 30-year editorial publication history on science advocacy and research. Her op-eds and letters to the editor are published in various newspapers and magazines across the country, the New York Times and the Washington Post, to name a few. She has also published in high impactful journals such as Nature, Science, the New England Journal of Medicine, and JAMA. For those of us that do biomedical research, I think we can consider it quite exemplary to have published in one of these journals during our career trajectory, much less to publish in all of these. But most importantly, Ms. Woolley has translated this knowledge into change and has really used the power of people and the power of connections to make this happen. We all know that research is a powerful driver for the context that we are all embedded in. It's a driver for our economy, it's a driver for our health, it's the driver for our humanitarian efforts abroad. And really, it's a driver for you, the next generations of agents of change. Imagine being able to affect change in such a significant and impactful way. Ms. Woolley does not have to imagine this because she's done it. And I'm sure that she would say that you all have the power to impact change as well. As several of the students who met with her this morning said to me right after they spoke to her, they said, Ms. Woolley is, and I quote from 3 different students, she is inspiring, she's motivational, and she's simply the best. With that said, please help me give Ms. Mary Woolley a hurricane welcome to the University of Miami.
Thank you, Willie. everybody. I've actually never had a hurricane welcome. Skip the real hurricane. So it's wonderful to be here, not least because it is warm, and it's not warm in Washington, D.C. It's also a pleasure not to be in Washington, D.C. for a change. It's not my fault what's going on there. It really isn't. But I do, Lily, you're right, I do have a very strong lifetime commitment to working for positive change. And I heard that resonating among everybody I talked to today, very much including the subset of the group in this room, students who are the future of positive change in our nation and our world. So it's a real privilege to be here. Thank you. And to be invited here by my boss, one of my bosses, because the Board of Research America is my boss, and we're so delighted to have you on our board. It's a pleasure to work with you. So I'm going to talk to you about things you can do. And I'm going to ground that in what's going on in the political world, in the context, if you will, the public and policy and political context of the work you're doing now and the work you aspire to continuing to do in your careers. Because it's not useful to pretend that you can just work in your own bubble. We all, in the course of our lives, every single day, are influenced by laws, policies, regulations, attitudes, and individuals. And some of those people are political individuals. And they're going to make a difference in your career, whether you ever talk to them, or think about them, or vote for or against them. So I'm going to tell you about all of those things, plus some tips on communicating effectively. So Willie already described Research America a little bit. This is how we talk about ourselves these days. And we're very proud of being innovators in advocacy and trying new things and learning from other people. And I think that's part of the spirit of science, of not getting stuck in where we are right now, but always having an eye for the future. Winning hearts and minds, which is another way of talking about advocacy, making your case, making it persuasively, involves these things. It involves things that we all know how to do, for better or worse, and we've all had personal experiences with great relationships and ones that didn't go so well. Speaking passionately, not usually when we're talking about science. It's okay to be passionate about things you care about, including science. Taking evidence seriously and encouraging other people to do that. And reaching out constantly, not expecting other people to do that for you, but learning how to make public engagement and advocacy part of the culture of science. It historically hasn't been part of the culture of science. It's starting to be now. I'm thrilled to say that in the breadth of my career, which is now quite long, I've seen significant changes. And I think maybe we're getting to a tipping point. It's very exciting. And that's the end of my talk. You all are, these were some examples that were provided before I got here, and I know now that there's many more than this. But these are some of the ways that you and your colleagues at the University of Miami are making a commitment to the broader community, making sure that science doesn't exist, science of any kind, doesn't exist in a vacuum, that it's integrated into the broader society. Learning how to do that, participating in it, making it a priority is a very important thing. And as I said before, describing my career, when I started my career, these programs like this, here or anywhere, simply did not exist. They were frowned upon, discouraged, and as a result, the community at large, more and more divorced from science. And we see some remnants of that seed that we sowed today with public disregard and worse for science. A lot of that was brought on ourselves, the science community, by failing to be constantly interactive with the broader world, if you will. So one of the things we do is commission public opinion surveys regularly. It's the same kind of public opinion survey work that people who are in public office or who aspire to serve in public office commission all the time. Same kind of thing you hear on the media constantly. And it's the same kind of methodology. Nowadays, mostly online methodology, sometimes telephone surveys, but rarely anymore. And it's usually 1,000 to 2,000 adults representative of the nation's total population. So that's the kind of methodology background here. So I'm going to show you a lot of this kind of data interspersed in this talk, and you should think of it as, is there a pointer on here? You should always, in this kind of work, combine very important and somewhat important, and on the other end, not at all important or not sure, categories like that, because that's the way social science tells us, the science of survey work tells us people are thinking. There's a lot of people that just characterologically will never say very important or very anything, or not at all, dismissive. But that doesn't mean that they aren't positive about the issue, or that they aren't negative. It's important to see the negative too. So when you're looking at data like this, keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that this is a snapshot, moment in time, to be influenced, like any kind of public opinion surveys, by what's going on in the world that day. Plus in my own life, what's going on. So it's one piece of information. It's not be all and end all. But if you have a lot of this information, and you look at it over time, which we can do now, for 25 years and more with most of our questions, you can really learn some things about how things are changing or not changing. Okay. So Research America has been described, and we are 30 years old, but this is just to give you a quick glimpse, I'm not going to read it, of who we are. 430 now, members, not individuals, but institutions, companies, patient groups, scientific societies, etc. So we're an alliance. And we take that term very seriously and try to make sure that we're representing the views of the various stakeholders in research, especially research for health. But we very much care about the broad research and science community and always stand shoulder to shoulder with that community. And we have some sister organizations formally established in the 4 countries listed there. And many other partners around the world. Why advocacy? There's a simple reason. Advocacy works. These are examples of things that we've been involved in, some of which we've led, all of which we've had partners in, because advocacy doesn't happen all by itself with one idea or one organization. It usually takes years to achieve big things, and it takes a lot of partners, and there's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. If that sounds like science, it should. It's a lot like science. There's differences too, to be sure. Because advocacy, unlike science, can't be done in a laboratory. Or, if you will, to change the definition of laboratory, it's the political world. But these, I think you can see by looking at these issues, that they're big. They're very big. And sometimes they get, quote, solved and then come back. Because they haven't really been fully addressed, or there's different people in charge, and things are different. But it's pretty exciting stuff. And it's the underlying infrastructure of your predecessors' careers, your mentors, your advisors, your professors' careers, and it's going to be, some version of this is going to be like your career. Whether you stay in academia, go to industry, the nonprofit sector, the public sector, or anything else you do, it's going to be influenced by policies, possibly by appropriations, and certainly by laws and regulations. Now, where do things stand right now for the health-related agencies? And I'm going to focus mostly on NIH today, but the same things that I talk about for NIH apply to these other agencies. And policy work applies, of course, not only to federal agencies and their work, but also to the private sector and just broadly. So you can see here the funding for key agencies that we work with, what they received in fiscal 18, fiscal 19, and what we are recommending they receive in fiscal 20. Now, fiscal years in the government start on October 1st, so it's important to keep that in mind. So the work that Congress is doing on appropriations for fiscal 20 is very much what the conversation is right now, even though, you may recall, that we had not only continuing resolutions, but we shut down the government that impacted in this presentation only the NSF and the FDA, actually, not NIH and CDC. But that complicates when fiscal year money actually starts and stops. It's a mess. I assure you it's a mess. But the process still goes on. Now, the process is influenced by what people, voters, say to their elected representatives, and that work goes on in the Congress. And there's also a big influence by the administration, of course. So the administration right now, they're up to bat, if you will. The president's budget proposal will be probably, not for sure actually, released next week. At least the first round of it, which is traditionally called the, quote, skinny budget, top line. The Constitution gives Congress, and only Congress, the power of the purse. So the president can propose whatever he, and so far it's only been he, the president can only propose, can't make decisions about how the public's dollars are spent. That's the Congress's role. It doesn't mean presidents don't have influence, they have huge influence. And over the years, presidents of both parties have proposed cuts to these federal agencies. Both parties. And over the years, Congress, whether controlled by one party or the other, has allocated more money, and sometimes no more money, just flatline, and occasionally cuts to these agencies. It is not about one party always favors science and one doesn't. There's no truth to that. That's not the history. And you can see it on the campus of the NIH, among other places. There are buildings on the NIH campus. If you have been there, you know this. Most of the buildings have numbers on them. Many of them have names. The ones that have names are about half and half, Republicans and Democrats, former members of Congress. It's worth holding on to as an important point about the bipartisan nature of support historically for medical research. Our aim is to keep that going. It's very dangerous when any issue becomes politicized and people are for it, against it, depending on their politics. Dangerous indeed. So there's one very important, awful thing that's in place right now that we're working to change, and I hope you'll help us change it. It's called sequestration. This was a terrible compromise that was reached by the Congress in 2011 as a last-ditch way to control spending. They developed this kind of poison pill that if they didn't take other action, doesn't matter what it is, that an automatic cut system would go in place for 8-10 years. That was in 2011. It was a terrible system, terrible idea. Nobody really wanted it to happen, but it did because it couldn't reach any other compromises. So automatic spending cuts were enacted in 2011 on a scale that is still in effect to this day. But Congress has taken steps in the past 8 years to put that on hold, to say, well, we didn't really mean that. But they never repealed the legislation. So we're at it again, right now. So without that being lifted, that cap being lifted, there'll be draconian cuts to everything that we spend our tax dollars on, everything. From defense to the National Alliance for Mental Health, not the Alliance, the National Mental Health Institute, to the National Humanities program, and everything, I mean everything, except entitlements. So that said, this CAPS problem, I want you to keep that in mind, because here's, only for NIH, here's how funding would go up and how it's gone up historically, and just so you don't think we're just talking about being greedy, you know, once you adjust for CPI, we're not talking about out of control spending, the sky's the limit. But that's what the ask here is, and you can see some history here, including the supplement called ARA that NIH got, that we worked very hard on to get some extra money. Okay, now here's what would happen. If the president's budget, as we understand, it will be when it's released tomorrow, next week, what the president's budget would do. In other words, take us way back, many steps backward. Not only for NIH, not like NIH would be singled out, or the science agencies, generally speaking, singled out, not at all. It's all about this CAPS thing, these artificial budget caps. So, one of the reasons that will be offered next week and by other people for some time to come is that we simply can't afford to spend any more tax dollars on anything. We can't afford it. We're going to bankrupt the country. Well, it turns out that that may or may not be true. No, we can't really tell. But the public is not willing to throw research for health and medical research under the bus on the way to accomplishing that goal. There's other research that shows, public survey research, that shows the public isn't paying attention to this issue at all, the deficit. But it guaranteed going to be coming up, you're going to hear a lot about it in the next several weeks, maybe longer, that the deficit's out of control, we've got to tamp down spending. So falling into the trap, and that's the way I think about it, of saying, well, yeah, actually, you're right, I guess we're being greedy. It's a horrible mistake. Not only is it not in your interest personally, because it may in fact result in you having fewer dollars, you and your colleagues, to spend on research, it's also not going to help the country accomplish our goals. So how do you fix this? It's a combination of revenue and cost controls where it's appropriate. But revenue is a piece of the puzzle. And remember, we just had some big tax cuts that were not paid for, which is part of the reason we have this deficit. But that's background. So if the president's budget did turn out to be the budget that Congress adopted, it'd be about a 10% cut in the NIH budget. And if you then just do the math, that means a 10% cut in everything you're doing. 10%. That's not a haircut. That's not, oh, you won't feel it. It's major. That means a lot of people would lose their jobs. And progress would be severely compromised. But it could happen. It could happen. That's why we and others are running an ad campaign that'll come out in the next couple of weeks called Raise the Caps. That's what we call it internally. Well, you can see it here. You will not see it here in the media audit world of the Miami area. It's only for Washington, D.C. because it's a pretty esoteric issue, sequestration, raise the caps. But if you're a member of Congress, you know what this issue is all about. If you're a staffer for the Congress, if you're in a federal agency, etc., if you're the media in the Washington, D.C. area, you know what this issue is. So you're going to hear about it. And time for screenshots. Yeah, I saw some people picking, please. And you can do it right now if you've got your device on you. These are the people, these 4 leaders of the Congress who are going to be more influential than anybody else in making sure that those caps get lifted. The more voices they hear from, and literally this is just about counting, they get hundreds of thousands of tweets Their staff will tell them that, and we hope they'll take action. So it really does matter. Ask your friends, ask your family, ask everybody you can get your hands on, so to speak, you can influence, to weigh in. It's great to ask your own member of Congress too, don't get me wrong, but these are the people who will ultimately be making the decision. So our former chairman, John Porter, was the chairman in the House, on the House side of the Congress, when he was chairman of the relevant committee, HHS committee, when the NIH budget was doubled. We were working the outside, the advocacy part, he was working the inside, at a Senate counterpart. But arguably, he's been the most influential person of his generation in advancing medical progress via support for the NIH and the CDC, both of which remain very close to his heart. And he says this all the time to the science audiences. So let me show you a little more data. We know that the public want scientists to not only talk to other people in the public, to them, members of the public. The public wants scientists to talk to elected officials. That's good. People overwhelmingly say across both parties, and to a lesser degree, independents, who tend to be anti-government, be it like libertarian or outright anti. Public policies should be based on science. Well, are they? Sometimes, right? But the public's expectation is that they are based on science. This is good to know. Public's on your side, our side. And it's important for those elected officials to listen to scientists. And this is surprising to us. A strong increase just over a 2.5 year period. We rarely see increases like that or decreases, changes. Rarely see that. And I think this is an important counterpoint to the impression that the public doesn't care about science anymore. People raise questions, yes, and I'll get to that. But bottom line, you wouldn't expect to see this if it were true that the public had just sort of had it with science, right? So, I'm going to get you a little more involved here. So, imagine you are at, well, first of all, you have to take yourself physically in your mind, but imagine yourself in wherever it is that you are registered to vote, and I certainly hope you are registered to vote. So that might be Pennsylvania or Indiana or Oklahoma or other places that I know some of you are from. So you are there, and you're in your local Starbucks on a weekend, okay? And your member of Congress walks in on the same errand. They're going to get a cup of coffee or whatever they want. So raise your hand if you recognize that person by sight. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Okay. Maybe 5 of you. That's about typical for this size audience. Maybe 1 more than usual that I see. Not good though. But now, raise your hand if your member of Congress recognizes you by sight. Anybody? Wow, okay, well, it's part of your job. But not everybody whose job it is to get to know their elected representatives even know them. I think it's part of everybody's job, is in the science community. When you realize that nobody, basically nobody raised their hand here, why do you think that science seems invisible to so many members of Congress? When they're home with their constituents, who are the people who are going to decide whether they're going to stay in the Congress, they are approached every day at Starbucks, at grocery stores, at the dry cleaners, everywhere they go. They're approached by constituents who want to talk to them about their issue. They tell us, members of Congress tell us, when we say, what can we do to help you be a champion for research? They say, tell the people in my district to talk to me in my district about the importance of federal funding and strong policies for research. That's what I'm telling you. Approaching your member of Congress is not that hard. Now, if you are from this area right here, these are some people who might be your member of Congress. They also might not be, either because you don't vote here or because it's somebody else who lives a little bit further afield. But these are examples. If you don't know who your member of Congress is, ask Siri. We have people calling us up to find out. Can we help them find out who their member of Congress is? That's preposterous. This is easy, and you should know. And think about what you have in common with your elected officials. You may, in fact, despite the fact you might not even know who they are, but you may, in fact, not like what they stand for or what you believe they are voting for or against. But you do, nonetheless, you have something in common with them. It's very important. And knowing that it's going to make it easier for you to approach them when you see them. You serve the public's interest. That's the very definition of what an elected official does. And it's also the definition, a self-definition of what you do. And what you've told me as I've been here on this trip and talked to you in small groups or one-on-one is your ambition to do. You want to make a difference. That means you want to serve the public's interest. And the odds are the public, one way or another, is paying for your education and for your research. That's another way to serve the public's interest. And that's how to approach a person whom you now know their name and what they look like, because that's public information. And so you go up to them at Starbucks and you say, excuse me, aren't you Donna Shalala? That's an easy one. Okay. And of course, that is Donna Shalala. But so I want to thank you for your service, for serving the public's interest. That's what I do too. And that person is going to say, you got it wrong, I'm not Donna Shalala, I just look like her. I mean, that could happen. But they're not going to be shocked because it's happened to them before. They're getting Rainer for your member of Congress. But you know, what they're going to say back, Donna Shalala or anybody else, is, really, tell me how you serve the public's interest. There you go. You're in a conversation. And you're in it together because you have something in common. Serve the public's interest. So what are you going to ask? Once you start that conversation, what are you going to ask that person to do? It's good to have a few things in mind. This is an easy one. And when I looked it up, I was shocked. In the Congress, there are hundreds, if not thousands, I don't know, hundreds at least, of caucuses. There's caucuses for everything. Every endangered species and every thriving species. Every state, every industry issue, everything you can think of, there's a caucus. And the reason members of Congress join caucuses, and you can see it on their website, what caucuses they belong to, they join them because their constituents ask them to. They don't have to take a pledge. They don't have to say, I will vote for X or Y or Z. It's just a statement about their constituents' interests. And if enough constituents ask, they will join. Now, this looks pretty bleak, that all of these are no's. But I should say that every new congressional session, you know, it's every 2 years, and starts in January, they wipe the slate clean in the House, so nobody is on any caucus. So you have to start over again. So there may be some people here on this list who have been on the NIH caucus in past Congresses. They just haven't signed up again this year, so it doesn't mean they're negative about the NIH. And I'm only talking about the NIH on this slide. There's also a caucus for NSF, for CDC, etc. It's an easy thing for them to say yes to you about, and it's a start. So this is the first thing, a first step to think about. You may want to talk to them about other things too. This one's easy. So You also want to make the case for raising the budget caps. You want to take the time to weigh in through websites to urge them in their own asks of appropriators. Gets a little more 1 or 2 steps here. But this is the time of year to ask every member of Congress to ask the Appropriations Committee for specific things. If there aren't a lot of people asking for more money in the federal science agencies, they might not get as much as they would get if a lot of people did ask. It's that simple. It's all numbers. It's all math. The more people ask, the more likely the dollars will go up. So back to public opinion surveys. This is the reason we do them, because public opinion matters deeply and always has in this country. Abraham Lincoln said it beautifully. This is why we keep a finger on the pulse of public opinion. I already told you about the methodology, a glimpse of it. So imagine, now you know who gets surveyed. That's the 1,000 to 2,000 adults all over the country, okay? So there's a question that we ask periodically. What would you say is the single most important health issue facing America? Anybody want to guess what the public says? Forget about prevalence or anything like that. What does the public say? What do you think comes up first? I'll tell you what it was 25 years ago. It was HIV/AIDS. Overwhelmingly. Okay? So we've been keeping track of this on a trend basis for 28 years actually. Are you surprised? No. Right? Rising healthcare costs was not mentioned 25 years ago. Even though healthcare costs were rising then too. So this is what's on people's minds. It's another way to have a conversation with people who aren't, working in your field necessarily. But you can say, gosh, one of the things that we do on the top issue of the day, rising healthcare costs, is we work on finding cures, preventions, definitely less expensive than working on after you already have a disease or disability. That's what we're doing to contribute. That's what I'm doing to contribute to this. Okay. Another thing we've seen surprise in trends is that those who say it's important, either very important or somewhat important, to do research to understand and eliminate health disparities has gone up. Much more recognition that this is a problem. And I would just say anecdotally from what the conversations that my colleagues and I have all the time, that there's less question marks around what do you mean health disparities? There's social determinants of health. That's still pretty tough for people to understand. But health disparities is getting through as a way of talking about a problem that people recognize we have and need a solution for. So it's positive. How about, this is another, at the moment, very powerful argument, is the U.S. losing our global standing. Americans want America to be at number one in everything. Fill in the blank, everything. Because that's, who we are. But when we start losing that preeminence, we started tracking this 20 years ago, that people were starting to wonder whether we were keeping our edge in terms of global competitiveness. Not necessarily having to be number one, but at least being close to the top of the list. And you can see now that by looking ahead, we've intentionally gone way out to see if we can see what people imagine, or whether it's their future or their children or their grandchildren. This is not what you want to see. You want to see that the U.S. prominence will strengthen in a much bigger way. And policymakers talk that way. They're very aspirational. We've got to be number one. The public isn't so sure that that's going to happen. And worse, not sure, ranks highest. You know? And this is about being a leader in healthcare. So again, going way far out to 2050. And the data, if you ask, and we do, who's the leader right now, it's pretty much the same answer. You know, they don't see a lot of change, and that's the problem. They don't see that we're making progress. They don't see how that's going to happen either. But the big concern in terms of competitiveness right now is China. And I don't have to tell you that, you can hear about it, read about it, and you know it's true. That scientifically speaking, China is on the move, investing in extraordinary ways. Because they can now, their economy is strong enough to do that, and because it's a national aspiration, a goal. So you can see here, this is not our work, this is another firm, but we're not a public opinion firm, it's another group that used a different firm. And you can see that there's, across the political spectrum, a lot of interest in making sure that we, quote, stay ahead of China. So this becomes a real talking point. Not everybody's talking point, and it's not one that you necessarily have to be ready to address. But we know it's a motivating argument on Capitol Hill. So a few other things. We see an increase in agreement about the value of basic research. But it's been positive since the National Science Board started commissioning surveys to ask verbatim this question in 1980. There's always been strong support, but recently it's ticked up just a little more. So the idea that the Americans don't support basic research anymore, which I hear all the time, still to this day, all across the country at various academic gatherings, there's absolutely no data to support that statement. The Americans don't support basic research anymore. It's the opposite. They do support it. Now, switching here for a moment. A lot of concern about failure to be able to enroll more people in clinical trials, to engage them in clinical research. Now, why is this? And a lot of people work hard in this area, you know, and have for decades. Personally, I come out of a clinical research background, so I pay attention to this issue, and Research America does too. So one reason people don't participate is that nobody has ever asked them to participate. And the doctors, healthcare professionals are the most trusted voice for people. That's another piece of data. And then, you know, as anyway, well, it turns out to be about the same percentage of people who've been asked are the people who have participated. That's not an accident. You know, it's just kind of really, you have to be asked. So where do you go from there? Well, let's make it a standard part of patient care to talk about relevant clinical research, relevant to your diagnosis, potential for participating in research that may or may not help you, by the way, but will be helpful to a broader population. As the more we learn, the better we will heal, to coin a phrase. So we've taken it even further. What if it isn't relevant to your diagnosis to talk about a clinical trial? What if every time you saw a healthcare professional and mentioned something about research? Wouldn't that be a healthy, wonderful thing? Healthcare professionals tell us, well, we can't possibly do that, we don't have time. But you know what? If they were reimbursed for talking about research, they would find the time. So we're working on that. Seriously, sometimes you just have to have an incentive to do the right thing. This is work from the Pew Center, which does a lot of work on public opinion on science, especially broader science than we typically do, and we do some things with them. You can see here that confidence, trust in these people, individuals representing fields, professions, is displayed here. And you know, we also have, and they have, displays like this over time. And I'll tell you that over time, confidence in all institutions and all people have been on the decline over time. That's a fact. But the rank order of them hasn't changed in years and years and years. Military is number one. Sometimes religious leaders are as high as the military, actually. But science is always in there. It's 2 or 3. Medical science ahead of other science. See how strong this is? Compared to, guess what, elected officials down at the bottom. And why is it even that high, people say to me. So the idea that people don't trust science anymore is silly also. People do trust science, especially scientists, individuals. But, despite that, science is pretty much invisible in our society. Not only in Starbucks. So the question, again, to that broad public audience is, can you give me the name of a living scientist? We're not talking about you here. I mean, you're a living scientist, of course, but I mean, we're not talking about what you know. We're talking about what people who aren't scientists, who live in your neighborhood, your building, or in your family. What do they answer? So are there any guesses as to what percentage of the public can give a name? Guesses?
5%.
5. Anybody else? 10. We were thinking in the right direction. It's actually better than anything. It's 20%. And actually, this is a little tick up from 17% last year, but it's not significant difference. And then we say, okay, let's hear that name. And a lot of people, below 2%, but significant, below 2%, between 1 and 2%, turn out to not be able to come up with a name after all. It's okay. But here are the names people do come up with. And most of these names have been on this list for years. Once in a while, somebody else's name will pop up on there. And of course, Stephen Hawking is dead now, but that was just a year ago, so let's not get too concerned about that. It isn't a test. Look at the names on here. Now, Jim Watson was just in the news just before the survey was in the field, and it wasn't in a good way. This was for some of his unfortunate racial statements, just outright racist, I'm going to say. But he was talked about in the media as very famous, which he was, scientist, so that's not good. But others on here, you can just draw your own conclusions. The point is, though, there's only 1 in 5 people who even try to name a living scientist. All right, so here's the easier question. Do Americans know where medical or health research is conducted? So the question is, can you give me the name of any organization, institution, place where medical research is conducted? So what do you think? Guesses? What percentage of the public? Well, only 1/3 of the public can come up even with, the university in my state, right? That's not hard. It's not hard. Or the hospital in my town, which may or may not be doing medical research. They just, blank, invisible. What are people thinking when they drive by a university? They're not thinking about research. You know that. They're thinking about education, for sure, but not research, despite all the publicity, public billboards, everything else, brochures. Nope. We're not doing a good job of self-identifying, not only to our members of Congress, but to the public that's not us. And it could be our family members, who quite frankly have no idea what you are doing. Never really had that conversation because it was hard. Because the first time you tried it, it didn't go well. Because you forgot to say, I work for you. But anyway, you can see who people do say, who do bring up. There's good news for NIH here. Over 20 years, they've gone up 2 percentage points. From 4% recognition to 6%. But that isn't good enough for any of us. It's also true, this one's not a guessing game, that only 27, roughly a quarter of the American population, realize that research takes place in every state. And guess what? Every state has 2 senators. And people in X state, Florida, don't realize that research is happening here. Why do we expect Florida's senators to stand up for it? Right? This is a politically extremely bad piece of news. And we're working on it all the time, and you should be too. So we need to change the conversation because things just aren't going as well as they could be. Now things haven't been devastating in recent years for medical research, but they're very tenuous. And public support is notoriously fickle. It could change, at a moment's notice. We can't count on those things, history or public support. So here's a little more research that wasn't done by us, but we helped support it, to try to get at some basics of what's going on here and how can we change the conversation. I'm not going to read through all this, but we found some things that replicate or extend what we've found over the years and the work of others, and some things that are concerning. Fortunately, no big anti-science conspiracy. People who are disengaged from science are disengaged from almost everything. And they're not making trouble. There are some troublemakers, to be sure, but they're a small percentage. Science is hope. Probably the single most powerful statement that can be made about it. Well, I won't go into that whole other story. And it's about benefits, not features, and hearts before minds. Hearts before minds, because that's how you connect with people. Emotionally first, and then later with facts and figures. Skepticism comes up all the time. The public is skeptical about research. Well, first of all, in the science community, skepticism is a highly valued concept and principle. We're trained to be skeptical. So when the public is skeptical and talking to you, rather than saying, let me correct you on that point, on which you are wrong and I am right, you can say, we have something in common. You're asking questions, you sound skeptical. I was trained to be skeptical. Let's talk. Experts in communication are on your campus. These happen to be drawn from these examples from a visit recently to Rutgers. You have them too. It doesn't take going far afield to find out how to be more effective as a communicator. It's about the other people, it's not about you, not about lectures. There's a simple frame that we use called then, now, and imagine. Anybody can do this for your topic. You should challenge yourself to come up with one phrase in the then, now, and imagine framework as a way to talk about your aspirations as well as the public generally for research. Don't worry about big money. Americans spend big money on all kinds of things. From athletic events to St. Patrick's Day. Don't worry about big dollars. Another way of saying, don't worry about big dollars. Let's have a country that's worth defending and worth educating. Big dollars, per capita dollars comparisons. It's $40 billion for the NIH, a lot of money, you bet it is. But compared to what? Don't worry about the money. The most important thing is to put a human face on research. Put your face on it. Remember the most important 4 words that a researcher can say and convey when asked it. So what do you do? Whether it's your grandmother, your cousin, your neighbor, whomever. Don't tell them you're a molecular biologist. Say, I work for you. And the conversation will flow. And the odds are they're going to say at some point, what can I do to help? What can I do to support you? Because they want you to succeed. As do I, but I'm the luckiest person of all. I work for you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is and on behalf of the graduate school, all of us at the graduate school and the Graduate Student Association, welcome to the TED Talks portion of today's research symposium. It's my pleasure to introduce our 3 TED speakers. They're all graduate students at the University of Miami, and they've been extremely brave and wise to present to you today. I say brave because this is a challenging situation. To translate your work so that other people in different disciplines understand it is no easy task. They're also very busy. They don't have extra time on their hands, and so doing so really inspires bravery and courage. They're also wise because they recognize what today's keynote speaker, Mary Woolley, talked about in terms of, in order for our work to have true impact, we have to be able to translate it so that people in different areas and disciplines can understand it. It must be shared with community members, with teachers, media, policymakers, and other community stakeholders. And so we're very glad to be able to listen to these 3 brave and bold individuals, and they can practice in this supportive group here with the University of Miami community. So let me tell you a little bit about how the structure will work. Each speaker will have 10 minutes and a handful of slides. After each talk, we will allow 1 question for each speaker in the moment, just a burning question. And then at the end, all 3 speakers will come up and answer questions from the entire group. So everybody will get a chance to ask questions. And so while you listen, ask yourself if you would be able to translate your research into words that are understandable for everybody, and if you'll take the challenge that these 3 students have taken. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our first TED Talk speaker. She is Vera Mayo, a PhD student in biomedical engineering, and the title of her talk is Breast Cancer Metastasis on a Chip.
This is my daughter, Lila. She's 6 months old. Lila has a 1 in 292 million chance of winning the Powerball lottery today. She has a 1 in 10 million chance of becoming president, and a 1 in 22,000 chance of being a professional athlete. But Lila also has a 1 in 8 chance of being diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime. 1 in 8 American women will develop breast cancer in her lifetime. 30% of these women will develop metastatic breast cancer. That's about 4% of the female population. At this stage, the 5-year survival rate plummets to only 27% compared to 99% when the cancer is localized. So it's the metastasis that's killing these patients. So what is metastasis and why is it so devastating? Well, metastasis is the process by which cells detach from the primary tumor, enter the circulatory system, travel through your body, exit into another organ, and colonize. These cells, or circulating tumor cells, or CTC, are therefore the main agents of metastasis. In the case of breast cancer, these cells like to travel to the bones, so that's where our research is focused on. As you can see in the figure behind me, the yellow cells, the circulating tumor cells, are traveling through the blood. At some point, through chemical signals between the cells, the perivascular cells, which are the green cells that line the outside of the blood vessel, get activated. They then reach in, attach to the CTC, and pull them into the bone. At that point, the CTC receives chemical signals from the bone cells called osteoblasts. What happens next remains unknown. Why? Well, there's many reasons. First and foremost, these cells are very rare and difficult to find. Let's say we draw a tube of blood from a cancer patient. In that tube, we'll find 100 CTC. 100 might sound like a lot, but in that same tube of blood, we have more than 35 billion blood cells. So that's 100 cells that we need in a background of 35 billion cells that we don't want. And even if we find them, 100 is not a lot for us to work with in the lab. However, these cells don't grow outside the body. So most of the information we have now comes from animal models which do not portray the human physiology very accurately, or from very basic petri dish cultures which do not portray the human physiology and the environment. Unfortunately, this affects how doctors treat their patients. Since they can't test the cells that are forming the secondary tumor, they have to work with what they have. So they use the cells from the breast cancer tumor. No big deal, right? After all, the cells in the bone come from the breast, so they must be the same. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. The CTC mutate throughout the entire metastatic process. When they enter the circulatory system, when they travel through your body, when they reach the bone, they're constantly changing, and we're always one step behind. So, how can we study these cells if we can't grow them outside the body? Well, what if we can treat the cells, thinking that they're still inside the patient's body? What if we can track how they change throughout the entire metastatic process? We would be able to track the entire metastatic process and how these cells change, and maybe treat them at the specific points in order to stop playing catch-up and finally treat the cells as they need to. And that is exactly what we're trying to do. And how do we do that? Well, we're engineering the environment in which these cells thrive. How do we start with this? So we need to take into account which are the key players. Obviously, we have CTC, or circulating tumor cells, but who are they interacting with? In order to leave the circulatory system, these cells have to go through the blood vessel wall. The blood vessel wall in the bone marrow is formed of endothelial cells on the inside and perivascular cells on the outside. As I mentioned before, these are the cells that reach in and take out the cells. So we have the blood vessel wall cells. Once they leave the circulatory system, they enter the bone, so we need to have bone cells or osteoblasts. We are using cells derived from humans in order to avoid all the animal problems that we find. So we have the three main players. We have circulating tumor cells, bone cells, and the cells from the blood vessel wall. Since CTC are so rare, we're using cells from primary breast cancer in order to work preliminary research. So how does it work? The CTC go into the flow channel in yellow. They travel through the flow channel, much like the CTC flow in your circulatory system. They go, at some point, they reach the blood vessel wall, they go up, and then on the other side of the blood vessel wall, we have the functional bone, which we have found. This chip is fabricated from acrylic, and it's very small. And we are able to do the wells and channels in order to populate them with the appropriate cells that we need. Like I explained, we have these three main characters that we're trying to recreate. We also need to take into account the anatomical environment in order to recreate. So like I mentioned, we flow the cells much like they do in the circulatory system. Our preliminary data show that the cancer cells, when cultured in the presence of the bone cells and the cells from the blood vessel wall, increase their markers of metastases and malignancy. So we can conclude that they're reacting to this engineered environment much like they would react to the actual bone environment in the This is very encouraging as we continue to tweak our biomimetic system in order to create a more accurate model for metastasis. This is our chip. Being Marley will pass it around. This a tiny little acrylic piece. Which doesn't look like much, but it's very powerful. So once validated and optimized, this model can act as a window into the metastatic process. We can use it to track cells in almost real time throughout the entire metastasis process. We can then build personalized systems from each patient's specific cells, derived from their own blood and their own bone marrow, and then see how their own CTC react to the entire metastatic process and how they change throughout each step. We will be able to target not only the primary breast cancer tumor, but also any cancerous cell that may be circulating through their bodies or that may have made its way into their bones. This chip will provide my daughter and all girls and women a tool to combat breast cancer metastases should they be part of the unfortunate 4% of females in this country who develop the disease. And maybe we will be able to reach that 99% survival rate. Once this platform is up and running, we will also be able to use it to study other cancers with similar metastatic profiles, such as prostate cancer or melanoma. This is just the beginning. Thank you.
We'll have a chance to ask Mira questions later, but is there one burning question that must be asked right now? Give a couple minutes for the next speaker to be mic'd. Our second TED speaker is Álvaro Ruiz Embaranta, PhD student in civil engineering. The title of his talk is Leading the Resiliency Battle of Civil Infrastructure Using Composite Materials.
So, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the U. I see some familiar faces here around. A lot of people that I don't know. However, I would bet that we all agree on one thing. The traffic in Miami is crazy. Isn't it? But I have to step back and talk about which are the reasons behind these traffic issues. So let me tell you something. One of the main reasons is the continuous repair work that our bridges and roads are suffering every day. So our infrastructure is mainly built of steel reinforced concrete, which is a combination of concrete and steel reinforcement. Concrete normally doesn't give us much headache in terms of durability. However, the steel reinforcement is killing the system. Why? Because of the corrosion. So the corrosion, it's a natural phenomenon that makes the steel inside the concrete lose its properties, causing the general deterioration of our infrastructure. So now, don't be shy and raise your hands, whoever who has seen a structure that looks similar to this one here around Miami. All of you, right? If whoever doesn't see it, I would go for an eye check. It's all over the place. So it's a burden issue. It's not only aesthetic. It's not only aesthetic. This is life burden. And here's the breathtaking fact. The US government spends over $22.6 billion per year just in repairs due to the corrosion of the steel. I'm going to repeat it. $22.6 billion. That's crazy. It blows my mind, really. So that's why there are a lot of researchers around the world doing very sophisticated research, trying to delay this issue, because in civil engineering we know that this is the main disease of our infrastructure. However, as you know, here in the EU, we always go one step further. And why delay it? We can avoid it. So what we do is we substitute the material that is giving all this trouble, that is the steel, by an alternative material, which is GFRP, or composite rebars. GFRP stands for glass fiber reinforced polymer. This is a combination of glass fiber and resin, which working together, they create reinforcement that is first stronger than steel. It's lightweight, so think about those workers working under the sun that have to carry all those rebars. If it's 1/4 of the weight, they will love us, right? But that's not the most important. It's durable. It doesn't suffer corrosion. So now you will say, okay, that's one thing. How do we prove it? And that's actually the objective of my thesis, is to quantify the durability of these materials, of composite materials, in reinforced concrete structures. How do I do it? Because I cannot be here 100 years testing. At some point I want to grab it, guys. So what I do is I use what I call these magic chambers. Simply, it's chambers where I fill them with different solutions, in my case, seawater, and I heat them up to 140 Fahrenheit or 60 C, which creates a very aggressive environment. So how do I use them? I go to the manufacturer of these composite rebars, I tell them, okay, send me a batch of these rebars. Go to the lab. First of all, I characterize this material. I run all the tests that are necessary to know the mechanical properties. And then I take them and I put them in these magic chambers. These will act as a time machine. I put them there. I wait up to, in my case, up to 2 years in these very aggressive environments. Then, after these 2 years, I go back, I take them out, and then I check the same mechanical properties as at the beginning. So I can know what is the retention in different mechanical properties of these materials. As you can imagine, this doesn't represent real life. What I need to know is how this material is going to behave in real life. So what do I do? Here comes the complex part. I get that shortened data and using complex mathematical models, such as Arrhenius models or alternatives, I use that shortened data to predict the long-term behavior in real life. So I want to know the equivalency of this very aggressive environment to the real life situation. So the project is not done, but the preliminary results show that by using this material, we can extend the service life of our concrete infrastructure by 2. We can double it. But are you all aware what is the impact of these results? This crazy. So, first of all, that means that I can build a bridge out of composite materials that will last 2 times as long as steel. So, the reconstruction will be half. Not only that, I'm going to create a bridge or other structure that won't need repairs. So I can avoid almost $22.6 billion that the US government spends per year. Can avoid to have those repairs. And the last one that for me, personally, it's what makes me proud of what I'm doing. We are proud to already have built some structures with this technology. Here on campus we have 2 bridges built with it. One of them is between the lake and the swimming pool. And I'm the one that will certify that. That bridge that now looks great, it will remain great for the next 100+ years. So guys, basically, if you want to save all those billions of dollars in repairs and reconstruction, but maybe here most importantly for many of you, you don't want to stay stuck in traffic here in Miami. You want to keep seeing Miami shining. Keep an eye on this technology because it's going to be, and it's being, the revolution of civil engineering. Thank you very much.
What's the price comparison between this material and steel?
What is it?
What's the price comparison between this material? I mean, you don't have to give me exact, but
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. That's actually what the end users normally ask. And right now, the price, it's comparable. So the initial price, initial cost of the structures could be 1-2% higher if we take into account the repairs that don't have to happen, plus the reconstruction that doesn't need to happen because it lasts double, then the numbers go to the sky. But the initial cost is very comparable. It's not like now we with this, it's 10 times more expensive.
thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you.
The mic change.
Our last TED-like talk speaker is Hillary Yip. She is a master's student in music therapy, and the title of her talk is The Effect of Rhythmic Cueing in Martial Arts on the Motor Skills of Children with Autism.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to tell you about my research project. I'm going to share why I did it, how I did it, and what I found. Autism is characterized by social, communication, and motor differences. These motor differences may impact your social interactions because sharing, gesturing, and playing with others is difficult without coordinated motor skills. To improve these motor skills, children with autism can enroll in physical activity programs such as jogging, cycling, and martial arts. In martial arts programs, they have improved their social skills, communication skills, decreased stereotyping behaviors that are characteristics to their diagnosis, as well as improved balance skills. As a music therapist, I have clinical experience working with children with autism, and as a martial artist, I've used rhythm to teach martial arts to children with autism. Therefore, I'm suggesting the use of a rhythmic cue as an auditory timing cue to help the execution of motor behaviors. Motor skills and rhythm perceptions are processed in similar areas of the brain in this neural overlap. So in this neural overlap, the following areas are processing rhythm and motor skills. The premotor cortex here helps prepares and plan movement behaviors. The supplementary motor area is involved with executing sequential movements. The pre-supplementary motor area is involved with helping executing movements. And the basal ganglia is a subcortical structure that's involved with encoding motor programs. And lastly, the cerebellum here is involved with coordinating simple and more complex movements. So this neural overlap of processing rhythm skills and motor skills provides a preliminary justification that rhythm may be an impactful cue to execute motor behaviors. Furthermore, when exposed to rhythm, these neural structures activate and prepare for motor behaviors, which can result in enhanced motor execution. When music therapists have used rhythm and musical cues to direct movements, children with autism have improved their bilateral coordination skills, their balance skills, as well as their strength skills. So no published study has looked at the combination of rhythm and martial arts with children with autism. Therefore, my study is filling this gap in the literature, and it leads me to my true research question. What is the effect of rhythmic cueing in martial arts on the motor skills of children with autism? And secondly, how well can children with autism learn martial arts? I worked with the staff at the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities here at the University of Miami to recruit children with autism. My study, I had 10 participants who were 10 male children with all functioning levels of autism between the ages of 7 and 12 years old with no martial arts experience. They each participated in 8 individual 30 minutes rhythm and martial arts sessions across a period of 4 weeks. Each session began and ended with a bow and a meditation period, included time for stretching and reviewing and learning martial art movements. I designed a 15-movement sequence of martial art movements based on my clinical experience of teaching martial arts to children with autism. And these sequences and movements included basic stances, punches, kicks, blocks, as well as movement sequences that included a block and a strike in multiple directions. To coordinate and guide these martial art movements, I used percussion and drum kit MIDI files to help create and arrange rhythmic cues. Excuse me. These rhythmic cues provided information on the temporal, the spatial, and the force parameters of each of these movements. So pitch was used to denote the range of movements, as well as the starting and stopping points. Lower pitches designated for downward movements, while higher pitches indicated more upward movements. Tempo was used to help with the timing of the movements, as well as provide a consistent structure for the child to anticipate the amount of time between each point of a movement and to know when to execute the movements. Dynamics was used to indicate the amount of force needed to do a movement, where a louder sound meant more force was needed, and a softer sound meant less effort was needed. I will demonstrate a movement that I taught using rhythmic cues to the children with autism. It's called a kick, punch, punch. So you were able to hear some of the pitch differences, the dynamic differences, as well as that tempo. I worked with Doctor of Physical Therapy students and a professor in physical therapy to assess and administer the second edition of Brunick's-Ostrowski's test of motor proficiency to address the motor skills of children with autism as both pre- and post-test. I found that the children with autism show statistically significant improvements in their bilateral coordination of their upper and lower extremities, as well as body coordination, which is a combination of bilateral coordination and balance. In addition, the children with autism improve their balance skills, strength skills, and overall gross motor skills, although not significantly. To determine and assess how well the children can learn martial art movements, I created an original videotape mastery of martial arts test to assess their ability, both as pre-test and post-test. In this test, I would demonstrate a movement and then verbally prompt the child to imitate that movement. Data coders then watched these videotapes and scored how well the child with autism performed each of these movements on a 5-point Likert scale. 1 point meant the participant did not imitate the movement at all, and 5 point meant that they incorrectly imitated all parts of the movement. I found that the children with autism show statistically significant improvements in their ability to perform all 15 of the martial arts movements. Therefore, this protocol of rhythm and martial arts showed that it's effective to impact the gross motor skills of children with autism. In particular, it is more impactful for their bilateral coordination skills as well as balance, rather than on their strength or run speed and agility. Overall, their gross motor skills increased as well. In regards to the second question, Children with autism also show significant improvements in their ability to learn and perform these martial art movements. With the blocks, with the strikes, the stances, and these movement sequences that included 3 to 21 components. Therefore, the children with autism can learn martial arts movements. Music therapists can take the results of this study and work with either physical therapists or other exercise instructors, or based on their own knowledge of exercise programs such as yoga or gymnastics, to design and implement movement programs that may interest the children with autism, and using rhythmic cues to facilitate these movements, which can then address and improve their motor skills. The children with autism shared that they enjoyed these rhythm and martial arts sessions, and they were excited about coming to it every time, and that the rhythmic cues were really helpful in learning how to do the movements, when to do the movements, and enjoyed the whole process as they consistently asked, can I do it again with the rhythmic cues? I like that rhythmic cue sound. That sound is really helpful for me to do these movements. When designing the rhythmic cues, I use an instrument sound to cue, or I use a specific instrument sound to cue to each specific movement, such as that front ball kick. So each time they heard that sound in a later sequence, they had already associated the movement with that rhythmic cue, which helps them coordinate more complex movements that incorporate that move. So they had multiple opportunities to learn, practice, and master these martial arts movements, which in turn helped them improve their gross motor skills. Their parents also shared that they observed different changes throughout the program. So one parent shared that her child learned how to balance and ride his bicycle while enrolled in my intervention, and another child was tripping less on his feet and falling down less, and he was also more focused and calm after those sessions. And another child had more balance and coordination to smoothly walk upstairs. And one more other child, a different child, had more strength and coordination to give his mom a high five with more force and strength. So in conclusion, this rhythm and martial arts protocol improves the bilateral coordination and body coordination skills of children with autism. And through this protocol, children with autism can learn and perform these 15 prescribed martial arts movements. Therefore, rhythmic cueing in martial arts may be a viable option to use with children with autism to improve their gross motor skills, which can in turn enhance their social interactions, because initiating and responding to social cues may be easier with coordinated motor skills. Thank you.
Set up the chairs for questions for everybody, but in the meantime, any question for Toby? Thank you very much to the group of 3 brave and wise graduate students. Questions for the whole group, or anybody?
I was wondering about the new material for reinforcing concrete. Does the concrete degrade less as a result of using this material?
Yeah, so the concrete remains the same, it doesn't affect the concrete. However, one good point I want to mention to that, is that by having a reinforcement that doesn't corrode, because normally the concrete protects the steel. So as there is nothing to protect, we can save money by by using a concrete. It's actually not as protective as it's right now. So it's actually
The fact that it's not degrading,
yeah,
protects the money.
It's your time. We'll work on other questions.
I
I have a question. I know you've all referred to it a little bit, but I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about the next steps in terms of disseminating your good research so that it can be applied to real-world problems.
Can you hear me? Well, so our chip will be ultimately using labs so that physicians can get blood samples from their patients and then send the sample to a lab where technicians will be able to analyze the cells and how they change, as I mentioned, throughout the process. And basically, according to the information that they can extract from this, the doctor will be better able to suggest the right therapy for the patient according to the exact stage that the patient is on and the exact type of cancer or cells that the patient has.
For disseminating my research and for the future, I'm interested in doing some more research on how using a control group to see the comparison of children with autism using rhythmic cues in martial arts and children doing martial arts without rhythmic cues and see the difference in their gross motor skills, see that change.
Okay, so in our case, I mean, we are pretty confident with the lab work that we are doing. So our main approach right now is to disseminate this technology and also to convince the authorities that this material is safe. Because I mean, if the authorities they are not on the same board as we are, then they know it's not going to work. So we are working with different governmental agencies, providing help to write codes, and to, giving evidence to prove that this material is safe.
One other question, and you all did beautifully at explaining in words that we can all understand about your work. And I'm wondering if you can each speak a little bit more about how it's been to work across disciplinary lines with people who have very different languages, maybe trying to address the same problem, but using different terms and methods.
Sure. So I've been collaborating with the physical therapy department, and that's been really helpful in understanding what's expected for children with autism. And when we're assessing their gross motor skills, it's been really helpful to collaborate with them. And working with the psychology department and helping recruit children with autism and knowing how to work with the children as well as communicate best with the parents, definitely after the sessions and before the sessions. So it's been really helpful and it's definitely necessary for my research to have happened.
I feel glad you brought it up because I forgot to mention the thing and I feel really bad about that. Cancer is very complex, and so we have an extraordinary interdisciplinary team. We are working, we're engineers and we're working with physicians and biologists. So we have experts in cancer, bone, materials, device fabrications, stem cell biology, microfluidics, and they've all come together beautifully to tackle this huge issue. And well, in like biomedical engineering, we usually bridge the gap to the engineer and the biologist. So it's been, I think, a good mix of everything around this. So it's been wonderful.
So in our case, as I mentioned briefly, so I mean, I accept that, for example, my knowledge in chemistry it's quite bad. I don't know much about it. And actually my research is focused a lot on that chemistry. That's why I was forced, I'm happy that I was forced to have to partner with a lot of chemists around the country and also internationally to really tackle the issue of understanding what's going on behind the deterioration process. Because I mean, we know a lot about the corrosion of the steel. Even we know a lot. I got the first class, the first day I got into engineering, they were talking about corrosion. I still have issues to understand it. So think about the deterioration process of a material that is innovative, that is completely complex. So that's why that was our best partners. In addition to that, we partnered, as mentioned too, with with Rasmus on the campus to understand a little bit what's the effect of the environment in the structures, and many other partners.
Those are such nice examples of how you've been able not just to share what you know, but to be able to listen and be receptive and learn about areas that might not be so familiar to you. So how wonderful. Terrific. Other questions from the audience? So maybe just one last round of applause for